Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, I'm happy to tell you about a classic cancel culture dilemma. Jihad Rehab is a documentary by Meg Smaker, who's a former firefighter, moved from California to Yemen and then to Saudi Arabia following the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. Subsequent to its inclusion at the January 2022 Sundance Film Festival, both the film and the filmmaker have become pariahs in elite film circles, mostly because Smaker, a white woman, dared to make a movie about the experience of Islamic men. Film critics warned that conservatives might bridle at these human portraits, notes the New York Times in a recent, much-discussed article about Jihad Rehab's cancellation. But attacks would come from the left, not from the right. So the film centers on 4 men who were accused of terrorism, imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay, and later sent to a rehabilitation center in Riyadh. The center's purpose is ostensibly to de-radicalize and reintegrate its involuntary participants. The New York Times describes it as spanning an unlikely distance between prison and a boutique hotel. So this sounds like a fascinating subject to me for a documentary. According to several favorable reviews, the film forces audience to reckon with the humanity of its subjects, even if they were accused of terrible crimes. Quote, "The absence of absolutes is what's most enriching in Meg Smaker's new documentary," wrote The Guardian. What follows is a heady plunge into restorative justice, mind control, and cultural conditioning. This is a movie for intelligent people looking to have their preconceived notions challenged. Listen to that. It bears repeating, but the expectation from Smaker, the filmmaker, Smaker, was that if anyone would find the film offensive, it was actually going to be a sort of self-described patriotic conservative who is disinclined to empathize with alleged jihadists, even those who were arrested while underage, maintained their innocence, and were subject to torture, let's be frank, at Guantanamo Bay. But conservatives aren't canceling Jihad Rehab. Liberals are. Quote, "The bottom line is such," wrote Jude Shahab, a Lebanese filmmaker, in a review of Jihad Rehab that criticized Sundance for daring to feature the film. She writes, "When I, a practicing Muslim woman, say that this film is problematic, my voice should be stronger than a white woman saying that it isn't, point blank." Indeed, this was the visceral component of the torrent of criticism that has greeted Smaker. She is a white woman creating a film about a religion and a culture not her own. That she has lived in the Middle East for years, enmeshed herself in the culture, learned the language, and gained unprecedented access to people we would be better off trying to understand apparently makes little difference. Quote, "As an alumnus of the festival and recipient of a grant from the Sundance Institute documentary program, I am deeply disheartened," wrote Asia Boundawi, another critic. It is fine, of course, for people who dislike a film to criticize it. Cancel culture does not mean, let's be clear, merely when one artist critiquing the work of another artist. The controversy surrounding Jihad Rehab, as the New York Times tells it, this is on another level. This is not that. Quote, "More than 230 filmmakers signed a letter denouncing the documentary. A majority have not seen it. The letter noted that over 20 years, Sundance has programmed 76 films about Muslims and the Middle East. Only 35% of them have been directed by Muslim or Arab filmmakers." That's still a substantial number, but not enough for the signers of this petition. Now, the Times notes that the South by Southwest and San Francisco festivals canceled plans to screen this documentary after that letter. But no one did more damage to Jihad Rehab than Abigail Disney, a filmmaker and member of the Walt Disney family, who served as an executive producer for the film. She initially described it in excited terms as freaking brilliant. Then she changed course due to this criticism, penning an open letter of apology. Let me read you some of it. "I may not be in total agreement with every criticism of the film, but that does not obviate my responsibility to earnestly own the damage I had a hand in," she wrote. "I call upon my colleagues now, whether you are gatekeepers, funders, curators, heads of institutions, agents, buyers, critics, or other filmmakers, to rethink how we all behave when we are called out for our failures and our shortcomings." The letter, which ironically reads like the transcript of a hostage video, expressed Disney's commitment to, quote, "not creating any more pain, if only by accident or in ignorance." She apologizes for causing trauma and says that her mistakes are myriad, so I will not be able to claim them all in a single list, but I will try. Disney, the apology letter, addressed the other major criticism aimed at Jihad Rehab, which is that Smaker's interview practices are unethical, given that the men are unwilling participants in the center's rehabilitation program. They're compelled to be there, thus cannot give consent to be interviewed. Quote, "I should have pushed back on the idea that the protagonist consented to appear in the film," wrote Disney. "A person cannot freely consent to anything in a carceral system, particularly one in a notoriously violent dictatorship." That's deeply unpersuasive. I'm sorry, it just is. For one thing, Smaker attempted to speak with 150 different detainees. Only 4 of them agreed to talk. If the other 146 said no, I think it's reasonable to say that the 4 who said yes did so with some amount of self-determination. It's also standard practice for journalists to interview inmates who are incarcerated in prisons. There's no generally accepted journalistic convention that such reporting is unethical, or that you were just going to ignore it because that happens to be the case. Nor is it wrong for a person of a certain gender or ethnicity to attempt, obviously, to understand, depict, explain, and create art about a foreign group. There's a major difference between empowering voices from marginalized communities to tell their own stories, that's a good thing, and shutting down good faith efforts like this film's efforts. Los Angeles Times film critique Lauren Ali expertly highlights this distinction, writing that a film losing its shot at an audience over such a controversy doesn't encourage critical thinking about images of Muslims, it throttles it. Quite right. It's natural for works of storytelling that engage with weighty political themes to provoke wildly discordant reactions among audiences. And if Jihad Rehab had merely irked some especially sensitive viewers, this issue wouldn't be worth mentioning. But there is an active effort underway, not merely to criticize this kind of art, but to banish it from elite discourse. Notice well the psychologizing on display. Smaker is accused of causing harm, anger, trauma. These terms are spreading insidiously and ought to be scrutinized by all who value actual diversity and actual mental health. What we call everything is traumatizing, everything is harmful, etc. And look, I have not seen this film either. I would like to see it. Maybe I would not agree with all the choices made in it. Sure. I don't know. But I think I found it so interesting. The expectation, I totally get the expectation, would be conservatives saying, how dare, these people are animals, they're monsters, they deserve to be locked away. That's not the criticism. So the criticism has been from the other direction.
Am I allowed to use the word that's like a donkey?
Ass.
No? Yeah.
You can call them, you say ass, yes.
But it's not about a donkey.
That's all we're going to say.
All right. How far up your own donkey do you need to be to think that the trauma and pain that's relevant in a discussion about this movie, which depicts the torture of men,
right,
and depicts Islamophobia, if you think the pain and harm that's relevant in this discussion is to people watching the film who feel like a white woman doesn't have the right to tell the story, first of all, if you want to play the identity politics game, okay, how about she's depicting some white treatment, overwhelmingly white treatment of people of color? Is she not supposed to do that? I mean, that's not even the point, but let's go there, right?
Yeah,
and also, do you want these stories not to be told? Is that what's more important for you? If you care about this stuff, if you care about Islamophobia, if you care about the torture of people, the war on terror, you want these movies to be made. And yeah, okay, fine. I'll listen to what a woman of color says about this, and I'll get that that's informed by her experience. But there are going to be people out there of Muslim descent, Islamic descent, Middle Eastern descent, who are going to like this movie. So what about them? Do their voices not count? Or we're supposed to listen to some brown people but not others?
Exactly. And it's so, it doesn't make any sense. Like, what if, take it to its logical conclusion, then we're only confined to telling stories about our own very narrow range of gender or racial view.
I can only make documentaries about secular Jewish New Yorker left-leaning women.
Yeah, I'm the only one allowed to weigh in on Italian culture, etc. It's so stupid.
It's just so stupid because it's of all the things, this is a documentary that all the people complaining ostensibly would celebrate because it exposes the very racism and erasure that they claim to care about. Just have some humility and let a story be told that actually speaks to the values that you claim to champion.
Right. It's so I wanted to highlight this, and again, I would not highlight it if it was just being criticized, in normal, I don't like this thing about this movie. That's fine. But they are trying to stop it from being shown, from being aired in film festivals because of the harm and the trauma.
Yeah, and what Abigail Disney somehow didn't realize this before. I mean, it's such an old story about, person says something's great, then, oh wow, it's problematic for me to say it's great, so I'm gonna walk it back.
Yeah.
But seriously, God forbid leftists, okay? And I know I'm white, but why don't we celebrate the fact that this documentary by a white person is actually going indicting white people for their war on terror.
Right, the U.S. government,
yes,
right, yes.
Yeah, the U.S. government, and it was largely, obviously, like Dick Cheney was the architect of this, white dude.
Right.
I just think these
only a Cheney is allowed to make a movie like this.
Yeah,
right?
only POC, a person of Cheney. Yeah.
All right, we'll leave it there. Looking forward to your radar coming up next.